The alert sirens wailed across the command center of the Coalition flagship, Unwavering Hope. Admiral Karen Wright gripped the edge of the tactical display table as another dot of light blinked out on the holographic map. "Outpost Sigma has fallen," said Lieutenant Eric Martinez, his blue-tinged face looking even more sickly under the emergency lights. "No survivors reported." Karen closed her eyes for a brief moment. Outpost Sigma had housed over 20,000 Coalition citizens, mostly refugees from the Centauri colonies. All gone now, consumed by the endless hunger of the Zorgath swarm. "That makes 11 outposts this month alone," she said, her voice steady despite the weight in her chest. "How long until they reach the Arcturus defense line?" Eric checked his data pad. "At current speed, less than 30 hours, Admiral." For 17 galactic cycles, roughly 21 Earth years, the unified coalition had fought against the Zorgath Dominion. The Zorgath were not interested in conquest or subjugation. They simply consumed. Planets fell to them not through battle, but through digestion. The insectoid species stripped worlds bare of all organic matter before moving on to their next target. At first, the coalition had been confident. With 12 advanced species working together, victory seemed certain against mindless bugs. But the Zorgath weren't mindless. They learned, they adapted. And most terrifying of all, they remembered. Every weapon the coalition deployed worked exactly once. Every tactic succeeded only on its first use. The Zorgath hive mind absorbed the information and developed countermeasures with frightening speed. Now, 17 years later, the coalition was running out of weapons, tactics, and hope. Karen straightened her uniform and addressed the bridge crew. "Send word to the remaining outposts in Sector 7. Begin evacuation procedures immediately." "Admiral," came a voice from the communication station. Officer Dara Singh looked up from her console, her expression a mix of confusion and hope. "We're receiving a transmission from Earth." The bridge fell silent. 6 months ago, in desperation, the Coalition had sent emissaries to Earth, a planet they had deliberately avoided including in their alliance. Humans were known throughout. The galaxy is unpredictable, aggressive, and oddly creative. The Coalition, with its focus on order and methodical progress, had deemed them unsuitable partners. But facing extinction changed priorities. "Put it through," Karen ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a stern-faced woman in a uniform Karen didn't recognize. Military insignia decorated her shoulders. "This is General Olivia Parker of United Earth Defense." "Is this Admiral Wright?" Karen nodded. "It is. Thank you for responding to our request, General. I assume you've reviewed the information about our situation." "We have," Olivia replied, "and we've been monitoring your communications. The situation appears even worse than when you contacted us." Karen fought the urge to drop her gaze. "That's correct. The Zorgath have adapted to our final line of defensive technologies. We thought the crystalline phase barriers would hold them back for at least another year, but they developed acidic compounds that dissolve the crystal matrix within days." General Parker nodded, unsurprised. "We've completed our analysis of the Zorgath threat. Our scientists and military strategists believe we can help." "Help would be welcome," Karen said carefully. "But I must be honest with you. The Zorgath adapt to every weapon and tactic, unless you have something they've never encountered before." "What we have," Olivia interrupted, "is humans." Karen blinked, in confusion. "I don't understand." "The problem with your approach," the general explained, "is that it's too logical, too predictable. Even your randomized defense algorithms follow patterns that the Zorgath can eventually decode. Humans are different." On a secondary screen, data began to stream in. Deployment plans, weapon schematics, and training programs. Karen's tactical officers stared in disbelief. "This isn't conventional warfare," one of them muttered. "No," agreed General Parker. "It's human warfare. We've selected our best for this mission. Our most unpredictable, our most adaptable, our most human warriors." The main screen split to show the face of a man with weathered features and alert eyes. "This is John Reeves," said Olivia. "Former Marine, security consultant, and exactly the kind of person the Zorgath have never encountered. John offered a slight nod. Admiral Wright, I understand you have a bug problem. Despite everything, Karen almost smiled at the casual description of a 17-year genocidal war. That's putting it mildly, Mr. Reeves. I've been briefed on your enemies, Admiral. They're good at adapting to patterns. Fortunately for you, I've been called pathologically unpredictable by most of my commanding officers. John will be leading our first deployment team, General Parker explained. A targeted insertion at what we believe is the Zorgath neural node. Karen felt her heart sink. We've tried attacking their command centers before. Suicide missions, all of them. The Zorgath have layers of defenses. With respect, Admiral, John cut in. You tried it your way. The methodical, logical coalition way. We're going to try it the human way. And what way is that? Karen asked. John's face broke into a smile that sent an unexpected chill down Karen's spine. It wasn't cruel or cold, but it contained something the coalition species rarely displayed, a predatory anticipation. The best way I can explain it, Admiral, is that while you've been playing chess with the Zorgath, a game of patterns and counter-patterns, we humans prefer to play a different kind of game. Which is? Karen asked. The kind where we flip the board, scatter the pieces, and pull out a flamethrower. 3 days later, Karen stood in the launch bay watching the final preparations for the human drop pod. Coalition engineers hovered nervously as John Reeves made last-minute modifications to equipment they had certified as perfect. You're removing the safety regulators, one engineer noted, alarmed. The power core could overload. That's the idea, John replied without looking up from his work. If I need extra juice, I don't want a computer telling me no. The engineer looked to Karen for support, but she simply nodded for him to step back. This was the point of bringing in humans. They didn't think like the coalition species. As John climbed into the drop pod, Karen approached for a final word. The fate of 12 species rests on this mission, Mr. Reeves. John checked his harness and looked up at her. No pressure, huh? I'm serious. We have no more options. So am I, Admiral. His casual demeanor fell away. I'll reach that neural node. After that, well, the Zorgath are about to learn why most species in the galaxy give Earth a wide berth. The pod sealed shut. Launch countdown began. Karen stepped back as the bay doors opened to reveal the sickly green surface of Zorgath Prime below. The planet that had once been a coalition garden world was now covered with the biomechanical structures of the hive. The pod dropped into space, a tiny metal seed falling toward a hostile world. For the first time in years, Karen felt something dangerous stir in her chest. Hope. John Reeves felt his teeth rattle as the drop pod tore through the upper atmosphere of Zorgath Prime. The heat shield glowed orange, then white-hot as friction tried to burn away the small metal capsule. Most coalition pilots would have been terrified by the violent descent, but John found himself smiling. Just like Afghanistan, he muttered to himself, though this drop was from orbit rather than high altitude, and the enemies waiting below were alien insects instead of human combatants. The pod's onboard computer chimed with an alert. Warning. Zorgath air defenses activated. Suggest evasive maneuvers. John ignored the suggestion. Evasion would be predictable. The Zorgath would expect that. Instead, he grabbed the manual controls and drove the pod directly toward the largest concentration of anti-aircraft fire. Sometimes the safest path is straight through the storm, he said, quoting his old drill sergeant. Outside, energy beams lanced past the pod. They were well-aimed shots that would have hit any evasive target, but completely missed the pod that flew straight at their source. John felt a rush of satisfaction. Already, human unpredictability was working. The pod's exterior camera showed the surface rushing up to meet him. The Zorgath world had once been a beautiful coalition colony planet called New Eden. Now it was covered with the strange organic structures of the hive. Massive towers of chitin and bone rose from the surface, connected by web-like bridges. Everything had a sickly green glow. Impact in 30 seconds, the computer announced calmly. John finished his final equipment checks. His weapons were not standard coalition issue. Those would be useless against the Zorgath who had seen and adapted to them all. Instead, he carried human-designed equipment, based on principles the aliens had never encountered. 20 seconds to impact. He thumbed a switch on his wrist computer. The pod's exterior speakers powered up. Just before hitting the ground, he wanted the Zorgath to hear something they had never experienced before. AC/DC's Thunderstruck, at maximum volume. 10 seconds. John braced himself against the crash webbing and grinned. Let's make some noise. The pod slammed into the planet's surface with enough force to flatten a small building. The specially designed shock absorbers took most of the impact, but John still felt like he had been hit by a truck. As dust and debris settled around the crater, the pod's doors blew outward, and the speakers began to blare the guitar intro of the classic rock song. John stepped out into the alien air, wearing his modified combat suit. The Coalition engineers had been horrified by his improvements to their design. Where their stealth suit had been sleek and silent, John had added bulky armor plating, hydraulic strength enhancers, and enough weapons to start a small war. Reeves to unwavering hope, he said into his comm unit. Drop successful. Beginning Phase 1. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Karen Wright and her crew watched through the pod's transmitting cameras. The scene was chaotic. Zorgath warriors, each the size of a large dog with too many legs and razor-sharp mandibles, were swarming toward the impact site. But they moved strangely. Their normally coordinated attack seemed confused. What is that noise? Lieutenant Martinez asked, wincing at the loud music coming through the speakers. Karen leaned forward, watching intently. It's called rock music, Earth entertainment. On screen, they watched as John did something no Coalition soldier would ever do. Instead of seeking cover or retreating from the overwhelming enemy force, he charged directly at them, firing weapons. As he ran, he's going to get himself killed, one of the tactical officers said. But something strange was happening. The Zorgath, used to fighting the methodical and predictable Coalition forces, seemed unable to coordinate against John's chaotic movements. Where they adapted quickly to standard tactics, they couldn't seem to predict his wild, seemingly random attacks. John's voice came through the comm, slightly breathless but excited. You seeing this, Admiral? They can't adapt to what they can't predict. He fired a weapon that looked crude by Coalition standards, a modified shotgun that sprayed not bullets but tiny canisters of what he called pepper spray mixed with skunk essence and ghost pepper extract. The nearest Zorgath recoiled, their sensory organs clearly overwhelmed by the chemical assault. Their communication is partially chemical, John explained as he fought. This stuff is like screaming nonsense into their network, jamming their signals with garbage data. Karen watched, in amazement as one human fighter carved a path through defenses that had stopped entire Coalition battle groups. Where did you find this man? She asked General Parker, who was observing from a communications screen. Small town called Fargo in North Dakota, Olivia replied. He was working as a bouncer at a bar after being discharged from our military. For excessive creativity in combat situations. On the surface, John had reached the first interior defense ring of the Zorgath hive structure. Coalition intelligence suggested there were 12 such rings protecting the neural node at the center. Reeves to command. First ring breached, initiating Phase 2. Phase 2? Karen asked, confused. The mission plan only listed penetration and location of the neural node for future attacks. General Parker smiled. Mr. Reeves has what we call mission creep. He tends to expand objectives on the fly. On screen, John reached into his pack and pulled out a small device. He attached it to the organic wall of the hive structure and activated it. A strange humming filled the air, and nearby, Zorgath began to twitch erratically. Homemade sonic disruptor, John explained. Based on what works against Earth insect hives, different frequency than anything you've tried. The inner wall began to bubble and dissolve as the Zorgath material reacted violently to the sonic waves, moving. To second ring, John reported, stepping through the dissolving barrier. Back on the flagship, Karen's communications officer turned from her station with a surprised expression. Admiral, we're detecting hundreds of unauthorized launches from Earth ships at the edge of the system. What? Karen turned to General Parker's screen. "General, what is happening?" "Phase 2, Olivia said calmly. "John was just the scout." "Scout? He's already done more damage than our last 3 strike teams combined." "Yes, and he's proving my theory correct. The Zorgath can't adapt to human unpredictability, so now..." On the tactical display, hundreds of new signals appeared. All human drop pods, all descending toward Zorgath Prime. "You're deploying an invasion force?" Karen asked, stunned. "Without consultation?" "Not exactly an invasion force," Olivia corrected. "More like a very diverse problem-solving team." On the planet's surface, John had reached the 3rd defense ring when his comm unit chimed with a new signal. "John, this is Chris Bailey, coming in hot about 3 clicks south of your position." John grinned as he recognized the voice of his old army buddy. "Took you long enough to join the party." "Wouldn't miss it. Patricia and Sam are dropping north of you. The whole team is inbound." John checked his tactical display. All across the hive structure, human drop pods were making impact. Unlike the Sci-Fi, methodical organized coalition attacks, these landings followed no discernible pattern. "Time to show these bugs how humans fight," John said, reloading his weapons and moving deeper into enemy territory. Admiral Karen Wright could not believe what she was seeing on the tactical displays. For 17 years, the Coalition had fought a losing war against the Zorgath. Their best soldiers, their most advanced weapons, their most brilliant tactical minds, all had failed to make significant progress against the adaptive insectoid enemy. Now dozens of humans were tearing through Zorgath defenses like they were made of paper. "This doesn't make sense," Lieutenant Martinez said, watching the chaos unfold on the screens. "They're not following any established combat doctrine." "That's exactly the point," General Olivia Parker replied from her communication screen. "The Zorgath adapt to patterns. Humans rarely follow them, especially in combat." On the surface of Zorgath Prime, John Reeves had reached the 5th defensive ring. The inner layers of the hive structure were more heavily defended, with larger, warrior drones and complex biological traps. Yet John moved through them with surprising ease, changing tactics seemingly at random. "Reeves, this is Patricia Lane. I've breached the 4th ring on the northern approach," came a voice over his comm unit, "encountering heavy resistance but making progress." "Good work," John replied as he ducked under a jet of acid sprayed by a Guardian drone. "Remember, don't establish patterns. The moment these bugs think they know what you're doing, switch it up." Meanwhile, Chris Bailey had taken a completely different approach on the southern front. Instead of fighting through the Zorgath, he had deployed what he called the ultimate distraction. "Are those toys?" Admiral Wright asked, watching the feed from Chris's helmet camera. General Parker nodded. "Remote-controlled cars and drones from Earth, modified with flashing lights and noisemakers. The Zorgath seemed to have trouble distinguishing between them and actual threats. On screen, hundreds of small electronic devices zoomed through the hive tunnels, drawing warrior drones away from the actual human fighters. The Zorgath communication network, which relied partly on chemical signals and vibrations, was thrown into chaos by the random movements and sounds. "Humans call this thinking outside the box," General Parker explained. "When conventional tactics fail, they improvise with whatever tools are available." "It's working," Karen admitted, watching as the human advance continued where coalition forces had been stalled for years. In another section of the hive, a human woman named Samantha Diaz wasn't fighting at all, a research biologist in civilian OA life. She was collecting samples of the Zorgath biological matter and analyzing them on portable equipment. "Reeves, this is Sam. I've confirmed our theory. The hive communicates through chemical compounds similar to Earth insect pheromones, but much more complex. If we can disrupt these signals on a large scale, we can blind their entire command structure," John finished. "Nicely done, Sam. Get that data to the second wave team." The second wave of human pods had just landed, carrying not soldiers but specialists, engineers, scientists, hackers, and others with unique skills that didn't fit any traditional military category. One of these specialists was Lucas Gordon, a sound engineer who had worked in pest control before the war. He was setting up specialized sonic emitters at key points throughout the hive structure. The Zorgath nervous system is sensitive to specific frequencies, Lucas explained to Admiral Wright over the comm. Not enough to kill them, but enough to disorient them and disrupt their coordination. As the sonic emitters activated, the effect was immediate. Across the battlefield, Zorgath warriors began moving erratically, bumping into each other and attacking shadows. "This is incredible," Karen said, watching the aliens' coordinated defense crumble. "Our scientists studied the Zorgath for years and never discovered these weaknesses. Your scientists were looking for advanced technological solutions, General," Parker replied. "Humans have a unique talent for finding simple solutions to complex problems." By now, John had reached the 8th defensive ring. The deeper he went into the hive, the more concentrated the Zorgath resistance became. But he wasn't alone anymore. Other humans had converged on his position, each bringing their own unique approach to the fight. Patricia Lane, a former demolitions expert, had created pathways through solid walls by using controlled explosions, timed to the Zorgath's movement patterns. Chris Bailey had reprogrammed his toy drones to emit false chemical signals, confusing the hive mind about which targets were priorities. "We're almost to the neural node," John reported as he blasted through a cluster of Guardian drones. "But they're starting to adapt to our presence. We need something new." "I've got just the thing," said a new voice over the comm. Andrea Kelly arriving with the special package. On the tactical display, a new drop pod had landed near the central hive structure. From it emerged a human woman carrying what looked like a large metal container. "What is that?" Karen asked. General Parker's expression was unreadable. "Something we call Plan B, for when Plan A isn't unpredictable enough." Andrea made her way to John's position, the metal container humming softly. Whatever was inside seemed to repel the Zorgath, who gave her a wide berth despite their normal aggressive behavior. "Perfect timing," John said, as Andrea reached him. "What's in the box?" Andrea grinned. "Ever heard of Earth honeybees? Turns out their hive communication is just similar enough to confuse Zorgath receptors, but different enough that they can't adapt quickly." She opened the container slightly, revealing a portable bee farm with modified hives. The subtle buzz and chemical signals from the Earth insects created a bubble of confusion around them, allowing the humans to move forward with less resistance. "10th ring breached," John reported. 2 more to go." Back on the flagship, Admiral Wright was receiving reports from across the battlefield. Wherever humans engaged with Zorgath forces, the aliens were retreating or fighting ineffectively. It was unlike anything the Coalition had seen in 17 years of war. "Their neural node is heavily defended," Karen warned. "Even with your unconventional tactics, breaking through the final defenses will be nearly impossible." "Impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet," John replied. "Besides, we haven't even used our secret weapon." "Secret weapon?" Karen looked to General Parker. "What secret weapon?" The general smiled slightly. "Something uniquely human that the Zorgath have never encountered before." "Which is?" "Music," came the reply. On the planet's surface, the humans had reached the 11th defensive ring. Beyond it lay the final barrier and then the neural node itself, the control center for the entire Zorgath collective consciousness. The 11th ring was defended by the largest Zorgath warriors they had seen, yet massive creatures with armor-plated exoskeletons and deadly natural weapons. They moved with intelligence and purpose, showing signs of individual thought rather than just hive mind control. "These ones are different," Patricia warned as they took cover from acid spray. "They're adapting faster." "Time for the finale, then," John said. He pulled out a small device and handed similar ones to the other humans. "Everyone, sync your sonic emitters to this frequency." The humans activated their devices simultaneously. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then across their comm units and through speakers attached to their armor, a simple human song began to play. The same song at the same time, but with each human broadcasting a slightly different part of the melody. "What is happening?" "Admiral," Wright asked as the Zorgath forces near the humans began to move in strange, almost rhythmic patterns. Music is mathematics, patterns, and emotion all in one package, General Parker explained. The Zorgath can adapt to patterns, but they can't process the emotional component of music. It creates a logic paradox in their hive mind. As the song reached its chorus, the massive Guardian drones began to move erratically, some even turning against each other. 11th ring is compromised, John reported. Moving to the final defense. The humans pushed forward, their coordinated music creating a wave of confusion that swept through the Zorgath ranks. For the first time in 17 years, victory against the seemingly unstoppable enemy felt possible. The final defensive ring of the Zorgath hive loomed before John Reeves and his team. Unlike the outer rings, which were primarily guarded by drone warriors, this barrier pulsed with strange energy. The walls themselves seemed alive, rippling, with what looked like thousands of tiny eyes that tracked every movement of the approaching humans. "I don't like the look of this," Patricia Lane said, keeping her weapon trained on the undulating surface. "Those aren't normal Zorgath defenses." John nodded. "They're learning. This close to the neural node, we're dealing with the smartest part of the hive mind." Andrea Kelly scanned the barrier with a handheld device. It's reading as both organic and technological. They've incorporated pieces of coalition technology they've captured over the years. "Clever bugs," Chris Bailey muttered. "They've built a defense specifically against us." On the unwavering hope, Admiral Karen Wright watched with growing concern. The tactical display showed the final barrier as a red pulsing dome surrounding the neural node. Coalition scientists were analyzing the readings from the human team's scanners. "That barrier contains elements of our phase shield technology," reported Lieutenant Martinez. "But they've merged it with their biological systems. We never thought that was possible." "The Zorgath are desperate," Karen said. "They recognize the humans as a threat they can't easily counter." General Parker's face on the communication screen showed no worry. John and his team anticipated this. The Zorgath would eventually start adapting to human unpredictability. That's why we prepared contingencies. On the planet's surface, John pulled his team back to a safe distance from the final barrier. They gathered in a small alcove carved from the hive material by Patricia's controlled explosives. "Time for Plan C," John announced, opening a secure compartment in his armor. From it, he removed a small metal sphere about the size of a baseball. "What is that?" asked Samantha Diaz, the biologist. "We call it the Babel device," John explained. "Coalition reports indicate the Zorgath communicate through a complex language of chemical signals, vibrations, and electromagnetic pulses. This device speaks all those languages at once, but it speaks nonsense." Lucas Gordon, the sound engineer, examined the device with professional interest. "It's going to create the equivalent of white noise across their entire communication spectrum?" "Basically," John confirmed. "But more like someone shouting random words in their language rather than just static. The Zorgath can filter out noise, but they can't ignore what sounds like meaningful communication." Back on the flagship, Coalition scientists were reviewing the specs of the human device. "It's so simple," one of them said in disbelief. "We spent years trying to develop complex countersignals to disrupt Zorgath communications. These humans just created a device that essentially babbles like a toddler in Zorgath language." Admiral Wright observed the tactical display where the human team was preparing to deploy the device. "Will it work?" "The principle is sound," replied the chief scientist. "But the neural node is the central processor of the entire hive mind. It may have defenses we haven't encountered before." Karen turned to General Parker's screen. "Your people knew this was a possibility. What's your backup plan?" The general's expression remained confident. "You'll see soon enough. John has everything he needs." Near the final barrier, the human team had completed their preparations. John held the Babel device while the others set up a perimeter defense against the Zorgath warriors that continued to probe their position. "Once I activate this," John explained, "we'll have a limited window to breach the barrier. The device will create confusion in the hive mind, but they'll adapt eventually." "How long do we have?" Patricia asked. 5 minutes, maybe less," John replied. "So we move fast." He activated the device, which began to emit a barely audible hum. To human ears, it made almost no sound, but the effect on the Zorgath was immediate and dramatic. All around them, warrior drones began to twitch and move erratically. Some attacked each other, while others stood frozen, as if receiving conflicting orders. The living barrier in front of them rippled violently, the thousands of tiny eyes blinking out of sync. "Now," John ordered. The human team rushed forward. Patricia threw specialized charges at the weakest points in the barrier, while Chris deployed his modified drones to create additional distractions. Andrea released more of her bees, which buzzed around the confused Zorgath warriors, adding to the chaos. As they reached the barrier, it still held firm despite the confusion affecting the hive mind. The Babel device was working, but not enough to bring down the final defense. "We need more power," John said, studying the pulsing wall. "The neural node is fighting through the confusion." Samantha stepped forward with a determined expression. "I have an idea." She pulled out a small container from her pack. Inside was a substance that glowed with a faint blue light. "I synthesized this from Zorgath biological material. It's their equivalent of adrenaline, a chemical they use to boost coordination during crises." "And you want to give them more?" Chris asked, confused. "Too much of a good thing," Samantha explained. "Their system is already overwhelmed by conflicting signals. This will force it to process even more information at once." John understood immediately. Information overload. Like crashing a computer by making it run too many programs at once. Samantha nodded. "Exactly." Without waiting for further discussion, she attached the container to the Babel device. The blue substance flowed into special chambers in the device, altering the signals it was sending. The effect was spectacular. The barrier began to pulse more rapidly, the tiny eyes all blinking frantically. Cracks appeared in the surface, leaking a glowing green fluid. Across the hive, they could hear the sounds of Zorgath warriors in distress. "It's working!" Patricia shouted over the growing noise. The barrier shuddered one final time before collapsing entirely, revealing a chamber beyond that pulsed with bioluminescent light. At its center hovered a massive organic structure that resembled a brain, but with metallic components fused into its tissue. "The neural node," John said, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "The brain of the entire Zorgath collective." They approached cautiously. Despite the confusion caused by the Babel device, the neural node showed signs of recovery. Tendrils of energy stretched out from it, probing towards the humans. "It's trying to analyze us," Samantha warned. "The central consciousness is more resistant to our tactics." John reached into his pack and pulled out his final weapon, a simple metal canister. "Then it's time for the last resort." "What is that?" asked Andrea. John smiled. "Something the Zorgath have never encountered and could never understand. Something uniquely human." On the unwavering hope, Admiral Wright leaned forward anxiously. "What is he deploying?" General Parker's expression finally showed a hint of pride. "The most powerful human weapon against a collective consciousness like the Zorgath." "Which is?" Karen pressed. "Individuality," the general replied. "That canister contains nanites programmed with human thought patterns, creativity, unpredictability, and most importantly, individual choice. When released into the neural node, they'll introduce the concept of individual thought to a hive mind that operates on perfect unity." John placed the canister against the neural node and activated it. As the nanites flowed into the massive organic brain, the entire hive structure began to tremble. "Time to go," John ordered. "When these take effect, we don't want to be anywhere near this place." The human team retreated as quickly as they had advanced, making their way back through the now chaotic hive. All around them, Zorgath warriors were moving without coordination, some standing still, others wandering aimlessly. Behind them, the neural node pulsed with new, erratic patterns of light, the first signs of something the Zorgath had never experienced. Before individual thought in a mind created for perfect unity. 3 days after John Reeves and his team breached the neural node, Admiral Karen Wright stood on the bridge of the Unwavering Hope, watching the screens with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Across the galaxy, reports were coming in of Zorgath, forces in disarray. Hive ships drifted aimlessly in space. Warrior drones wandered without purpose or direction. Some Zorgath had even turned against each other. "It's working," Lieutenant Martinez said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. "They're actually retreating from the Arcturus system." Karen studied the tactical displays. After 17 years of relentless advance, the Zorgath were pulling back from multiple fronts. Some hive clusters had gone completely dark, their communication signals silent. "The nanites have spread throughout their network," explained General Olivia Parker, who had arrived on the flagship to coordinate the next phase of operations. "Every Zorgath connected to the hive mind has been exposed to the concept of individual thought." "And that's enough to stop them?" Karen asked. "Just introducing the idea of individuality? For a species that has only ever known perfect unity, it's devastating," Olivia said. "Imagine suddenly hearing thousands of different voices in your head, all with their own ideas and desires when you've only ever heard one voice before." On the planet below, John and his team had been extracted safely and were now stationed in a coalition field base established on the outskirts of the former Zorgath hive. The massive structure that had once been alive with activity now stood mostly silent, with only occasional movements visible within. "Some of them are starting to form smaller groups," Samantha reported as she monitored readings from sensors placed throughout the hive. "Not one big collective anymore, but multiple smaller collectives with different behavior patterns." "Are they still a threat?" Patricia asked, cleaning her weapon nearby. "Different kind of threat now," John replied. "Less coordinated but more unpredictable. Kind of like us." Chris Bailey looked up from his work repairing one of his drones. "So we gave bugs free will. What happens now?" "That's what we're here to find out," said a new voice. Ambassador Daniel Frost had arrived from Earth to handle the diplomatic side of the unprecedented situation. If they're capable of individual thought, they might be capable of communication beyond just hive directives. "You want to talk to them?" Andrea asked incredulously. "These things have been consuming entire planets for decades. They were following their programming," Daniel explained. "Now they have choices. Some might choose differently." Back on the Unwavering Hope, Karen received a report from a coalition scout ship at the edge of the system. "Admiral, we're detecting unusual activity from the Zorgath mothership in Sector 12. They're broadcasting a signal unlike anything we've recorded from them before." "Put it through," Karen ordered. The speakers on the bridge crackled with strange sounds, clicks and vibrations that made up the Zorgath language. But there was something different about this transmission. It had pauses, repetitions, almost like a question being asked. "Can we translate it?" Karen asked. The communications officer worked at her console. "The computer is trying, but it doesn't match any previous Zorgath communication patterns. It's evolving." General Parker stepped forward. "Send it to the human team on the surface. They might have better luck understanding it." In the field base, Samantha and Lucas worked together to decode the strange message. They had gathered samples of Zorgath language patterns before and after the neural node infection, which gave them a basis for comparison. "It's rudimentary, but I think I've got it," Samantha finally announced. "They're asking why." "Why what?" John asked. "Just why?" "I think it's the first philosophical question the Zorgath have ever asked." Ambassador Frost nodded thoughtfully. "The first step towards self-awareness. They want to understand their own existence." "What do we tell them?" Andrea asked. "The truth," Daniel replied, "that there is no single answer, that finding their own answers is part of being individuals." Under Daniel's guidance, the team crafted a response, a simple message that conveyed the concept of choice, of different paths that could be taken. They sent it to the Zorgath mothership. Hours passed with no response, then suddenly the sensors detected movement. The mothership was changing course. "They're leaving the system," reported the tactical officer on the Unwavering Hope. "All Zorgath ships in the area are following." Karen watched the massive alien vessels disappear into deep space. "Are they retreating to regroup? Should we pursue?" "I don't think they're retreating," General Parker said. "I think they're searching for a new purpose, a new way to exist." 1 week later, representatives from all coalition species gathered on the unwavering hope for a formal ceremony. The war that had consumed 17 years and countless lives was officially being declared over. Karen stood at the podium, facing the assembled dignitaries. Today marks the end of the greatest threat our coalition has ever faced, the Zorgath. War is over, not through conventional victory but through transformation, of our enemy and of ourselves. She gestured to John Reeves and his team, who stood at attention nearby. These humans, representatives of a species we once deemed too unpredictable to join our ranks, have shown us that sometimes unpredictability is exactly what's needed. Their creativity, their willingness to think beyond established patterns, saved us when all seemed lost. Later at the reception following the ceremony, Karen found John standing alone by a viewport, looking out at the stars. The Coalition Council has voted unanimously to offer Earth full membership, she told him, with special recognition for your contributions. John nodded, still looking at the stars. What about the Zorgath? Any word? Our long-range scouts report they've settled in an uninhabited system at the edge of the galaxy. They appear to be building something but not expanding beyond that system. They're figuring out who they are now, John said. That takes time. Do you think they'll return as enemies? Karen asked. John finally turned to face her. I think they'll return as something we've never seen before. Just like we surprised them, they'll surprise us. That's the thing about introducing free will and individuality. You never know what you're going to get. Karen considered this. That uncertainty would have terrified me before. Now I find it interesting. Welcome to the human perspective, John said with a smile. We live with that uncertainty every day. As the celebration continued around them, news spread throughout coalition space. The war was over. The supposedly unstoppable enemy had been defeated not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by the simple, powerful gift of choice. A concept so human that no other species had thought to use it as a weapon. And across the galaxy the story spread, how the coalition was losing the war until a single human drop pod descended from orbit.